Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Lisa Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we're delighted to welcome back to the podcast Nichole Farrow, one of the UK's leading relationship and family coaches, who works with separated parents to look at how best to introduce a new partner to the children. So welcome back. Thank you so much for joining the podcast again. Do you want to start just by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. Thank you again for having me back. I really enjoyed it last time. So, and this one's probably even more meaty and difficult than the last topic we covered. So yes, I've been a family and relationship coach now for 7 years. So I help parents basically with their relationship, but also when it doesn't work out and they're going through divorce, co-parenting, and also blending, because 3 in 4 people will remarry, and so introducing new partners is all part of that. For me personally, I was born into a blended family. My dad had children from previous marriage, and then my parents divorced when I was 2. Both parents had 3 marriages. My grandparents are divorced, and of us 6 siblings, 5 of us are divorced, myself included. So it's very much, if you there's a statistic that says if you're the child of divorce, you're twice as likely to get divorced yourself. I definitely am that statistic. I'm now happily remarried with 2 young children, but there was a lot of work that went in between my divorce and my marriage now, and I'm a very different person now. But also it's kind of the reason I do what I do really, and why I work with parents, is because I'm very aware of the impact that our relationships have on the next generation, and the fact that we are all products of our environment. And if we don't model healthy relationships for our children, and that doesn't necessarily mean staying together, by the way, but if you don't model healthy relationships, then you are kind of condemning them to more of the same. And we see that more and more today with marriage rates are actually going down, but divorce rates are continuing to rise. So it's how we kind of break that cycle, as we are the generation of children divorced now. Our parents are the ones to go out and get divorced. Most of our grandparents weren't, and we're now trying to have healthy relationships, whether we're still married or not, but have healthy relationships with our co-parents and our partners for the sake of our kids. So that's why I do what I do.
Great. Well, I think this is, talking about introducing a new partner to children and to a co-parent. Obviously, that's going to be that could be a really testing time in kind of maintaining, or, if you're building on a relationship with your co-parent, or if you've got a difficult relationship with your co-parent, it's going to be often a bit of a curveball. So I think it's a really interesting and nuanced subject to discuss. I guess the best way for us to do it might be to take things a bit kind of chronologically through the thought process, and maybe start with, before you do anything, when you are, you're getting into a new relationship and everything's exciting, you think, maybe we're approaching time for, me to introduce my new partner to the children. What should people be thinking about before they go ahead and just go and do it that weekend? What's the thought process there, Nichole?
So first of all, you need to make sure that it is a relationship that is going to last the distance, because what you don't want to do is introduce multiple partners to your children. So you need to make sure that you really are 100% about this relationship, that you are actually thinking about a much longer term future with this person, and that there is perhaps even a plan to live together, or to move things forward. And if there's not, and you're just still really happy in that kind of honeymoon stage, and you're remembering as well that you're not with your children all the time, so you've got time to spend with your new partner, enjoy that. Don't feel the need to rush that part, because actually, many of us who've been married, the honeymoon stage is something you kind of wish you made last a little bit longer. But if you are at the stage where you're like, no, I'm really serious about this person, we perhaps want to live together, or whatever it is that's kind of triggering that, I really think it's time now that we introduce you to the children. If you have, regardless actually of whether you have a good relationship with your co-parent or not, in letting your co-parent know first that you have met somebody that you would like to introduce them to the children, and that you would like their support in how to handle that. Because even if you're not at the stage of being able to share that information together, which would be amazing, but if you're not at that point, and actually perhaps your relationship isn't, there, but you're very aware that your children are going to go home and tell your co-parent and want some support and to discuss it with them. Having them on board and on side is going to massively help you, as opposed to having somebody in the wings, kind of throwing rocks at your new relationship and undermining it. What you need to think about before approaching anybody is, if you're really serious about this person and you really want this to go well, then you need to think of how that person's going to be received by your children, and the fact that you want this person to be brought into your blended, because you are going to a blended situation now, family unit. And so you need to set them up for success. And if you introduce them to your kids without mentioning it to your co-parent, and therefore have automatically created an enemy, even if you had a good relationship with your co-parent before, which is what I see all the time, people have kind of got into a bit of a rhythm in terms of their co-parenting relationship. They bring in a new person, it completely upsets the apple cart, and all that hard work and and goodwill that's been built up gets shattered overnight. If you're really thinking long term and you want this to be a success, then you need to think about your new partner, your co-parent, and your children in all of this, and not just that giddy excitement of, I've got a new person and I want, we're all going to be happy, and, it's going to be rainbows and sunshine and everyone's going to be really happy about it. You've got to think about all the people involved and how you approach that in the right way. So telling your co-parent first is number one, giving them that respect, because at the end of the day, this is someone that their children are then going to be spending time with that they don't know. It's not about your relationship and the fact you've moved on. It's about the fact that this person's going to have an important role in their children's lives. And on the other foot, you would want to know who your children are spending time with if your co-parent moved on and met someone else. So think about that, that dynamic and that scenario first. If you can get them to support you, amazing. If they can be, I'm happy that you found someone, let's tell the kids together when we're thinking about it, great. If you can get to the point of actually introducing your new partner and your co-parent, even better, so that when the kids come home, they go, yes, I've met so-and-so, and, mum or dad has told me about them and they seem really nice, and, I think you're going to get on really well with them. It shows that kind of unity of your parenting together. This is something that you're doing together and you're still a family, because ultimately you are still a family, and that's what the kids want to know, is that they're not going to lose mum or dad to this new person, that the other parent is okay with it. They don't have to have this guilt of, if they get on with the new partner and mum or dad is still on their own, that they have this sort of, I can't like them because it might upset my other parent. You don't want any of that, and you can actually remove a lot of those issues up front if you tell your other co-parent and manage it together in a way that, as I said, introduces your new partner in a way that's going to be successful for everyone.
How do you structure that conversation? Because I imagine it's quite a difficult conversation. Some people do have very great relationships with their co-parents, ex-partners, but certainly there can be relationships that are more strained. And I suppose it's quite a difficult line to walk in some respects, because you want to be respectful and you want to have that conversation, but equally you don't need their consent or their approval. So how do you think it's best to kind of structure that conversation?
So I would say, I have met somebody. We've been seeing each other for X amount of time, so I know this isn't a flash in the pan. I would really like them to meet the children, but out of respect for you as their mother or as their father, and as my co-parent, I want to discuss this with you first. I want us to be able to do this together, because I want to support the kids in this, and I'm sure you do too. So again, making it about the children, not about I've moved on, you haven't. It's not about us. It's about, the children, which is what we share. And there is a common ground there, even if we don't like one another. And it's also about showing that respect, which quite often when a relationship is broken down and when you've gone through, litigation and divorce, it's that feeling of feeling disrespected at some point along that process of that relationship breaking down. So if you can show them that you're being respectful to them as a parent, not necessarily as a partner or an ex-partner or whatever, but as a parent, I think that's how I would frame the conversation. And if they say, I don't really care that you've moved on and I don't want anything to do with this, then, you can say, I realise that, and I'm not suggesting, give them the option to meet them, but say, because our children are going to be spending time with this person. I think it's, only right that you know who they are, which most parents would want to know anyway. I think they'd be cutting their nose off to spite their face if they didn't. And you might get that in the heat of the moment. They might then reflect and come back and go, I'm not happy about it. But if they are going to spend time with the kids, yes, I'd like to know who this person is.
I think that's a really important message, is about giving the other person time, isn't it? Because, you're in the honeymoon period, and, you've got all these exciting thoughts and plans, and the assumption is the world's happy for you because you're happy. That's understandable, and that's the way all the sort of love chemicals work. But even if you get on well, there's still going to be, and often actually, if the ex-partner has already got another partner, I've had clients tell me this is like, well, she's been together with someone for years, but she seemed to have, hit the roof that I've now got a new partner. It can still be a big thing, and I think there's a temptation for some people to kind of not quite understand that the other person might just need that little bit of time to process it, and the first reaction might not be great, but the second reaction might be okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, we can kind of react and say the wrong thing, or have that emotional outburst, but then reflect afterwards, or go and have a coffee with a friend who's just going, well, yep, okay, let it out, but really in the long term, in the long run, do you really want this? Because that's the thing, in the moment we can be, as you say, sort of charged in emotion, but actually you want to know who your children are spending time with. You want that person to be a good person. You don't want them to be horrible to your kids. You don't want them to come between your kids and their relationship with their other parents. So actually, for all those reasons, you want to support this, and that's what's right for the children. But it's that parent who's wanting to introduce a new partner. I think it's remembering that you have to go at everybody else's pace, not your own. If you want to, as I said, do this in the right way to have the best chance of this going the way you want it to, then you've just got to take baby steps and lay the groundwork, and not think that you're going to tell your co-parent on a Monday and introduce them to the kids on the Saturday. You need to allow that, as you say, that time to process this new change, because it's a new change. It's something that people are going to have to adjust to, and every change comes with, some, teething issues, and, where people do get into that new kind of adjustment. And the other thing is as well, is when it then comes to introducing the children, is to again do baby steps. Because this is the other thing that I see a lot. It's like, I've got a new partner and they're going to be here, I'm going to introduce you to them and they're going to be here all weekend. No, you need to tell them about new partner, then leave it a little while again for the children to adjust and ask questions and, all the rest of it. And then when you introduce them, it's a park date, it's it's a lunch or a coffee or something outside of the house, and you then go back with the children and spend quality time with them, because that fear that every parent has when they go through a divorce of, am I going to lose my kids? When you introduce a new partner, your kids feel that same fear. Am I going to lose my parent? And they now got a new boyfriend or girlfriend. Now they're always going to be around mum or dad, and I'm never going to get my one-to-one time with them anymore. And I'm going to get pushed out. And so actually, if you then, push this new person on them and make them, there for the whole time, or every time you see your kids, the new person's there all the time, it starts to undermine that relationship between you and your child, that that one-to-one time that's so key, no matter what age they're at, even if they're teenagers and they're grunting at you and pretending they don't want to spend time with you, they still don't want to lose their parent to a new person. And that's when the resentment can really build in terms of towards the new partner. And so taking baby steps is really, really key through all of it. If you take nothing else away from this, take baby steps.
Yeah. I think that's really, really important. I suppose on the flip side of that is, what advice can you give to someone who their ex-partner has not done it very well? The kids have come back from the weekend. We've just met, mummy's new partner or daddy's new partner. They haven't told you. The children might be upset or just confused. What advice would you have in those circumstances?
Yeah. So if they haven't told you, then, and you've heard it through the kids after they've already met them, then, they put the horse before the cart and it's already out. We can't do anything, we can't read it back. But I think a conversation with your co-parent of, this is something that is a really big change for them, for us as a family. You know, I really need to know who this person is, when it started, how much time. I can't support the children in answering any of these questions because you haven't told me, and that's not in their best interest. And actually, if you want them to accept this new person, then, you know, us working together to help to make that happen, and you seeing me as someone who can help with that, as opposed to somebody to keep out in the dark, is, you know, not going to work. Equally, you know, at some point there's going to be, you know, later on down the line, events where we're going to need to all be together. So, you know, I need to know who this person is. Explaining the fact that the children are upset. There are, you know, but depending on the children's ages, there are books. There are then conversations that you can have after that in terms of together or separately, but, you know, sharing consistent information and trying to kind of then support the kids. The problem being is that if that has happened, is kids aren't very forgiving. And in my experience, the first meeting tends to set the stage for future meetings. And if you alienate your children against your new partner from the get-go, it's really hard to unpack that, depending on their age. Really hard to unpack that, which is why it's so important to do this stuff first. It's not impossible, but it's going to take a lot more work, and it's going to be a lot harder than if you've done, you know, the baby steps and the, you know, setting the groundwork. I think at that point, it's then holding up your hands and going, I'm sorry, guys, I didn't think this through. I understand you're upset. What can, you know, I really would like you to meet this person, but I realise that, you know, I've done it in the wrong way. Can we start again? And then laying the groundwork and redoing it, because continuing at the same pace of, oh, well, it's done now, so we'll just carry on, is just going to create more resentment for your children and your co-parent. So I think admitting, okay, yeah, I messed up here. Actually, can we start to redo this and, you know, take it at the pace that you need to take it at? I misread the situation. I got carried away.
I think that's great advice. I think it's really powerful to admit fault and hold your hands up and go mea culpa. You know, none of us are perfect, and that's fine. And particularly in, you know, obviously post-separation conversations can be very difficult, and there are certain, you know, some couples get into the habit of treating everything like a battle, which is really counterproductive. I think often people don't expect that their ex to say, sorry, I was wrong. And doing that can be a bit disarming, and that can help to rebuild trust. It's something I often talk about in court proceedings, actually, that to you know, when if a client of mine is going through some proceedings and they've done something that's not great, that's not ideal, that has annoyed the other party, say so, because the court will kind of go, well, you know, if you walk in and go, I'm always perfect, I've done everything right, it's just not believable. And there's something that kind of softens everything and makes it builds that trust and builds that faith. So I'm a big fan of, like, you know, making amends and throwing up your hands when you've done things wrong, and that's really going to help to build things, I guess. You touched before about ages a little bit. I wonder if we could dig more into that, because when you're actually telling the kids, obviously it's going to be a very different approach for different ages. I think, how do you deal with it? What happens when you end up with, let's say you have a child who's 5 and a child who's 13, and the 13-year-old is going to understand romantic love and the 5-year-old isn't really. How do you deal with that? Is it separate conversations? Is it one conversation that's targeted at the younger one, then a separate conversation with the older one? You know, what are the tips for dealing with that quite difficult age gap?
Yeah. So I'd say it's one conversation initially, aimed at, as you say, the lowest denominator, the 5-year-olds, you know, understanding and interpretation of that. And then there's an element of, as you say, the 13-year-old's going to have a much better understanding of relationships, so that you can answer their questions and go into more detail based on what they want to know and what's appropriate for their age. But I would keep with a consistency in terms of the initial conversation. One thing I've seen quite a bit, not just with introducing new partners, but across kind of divorce conversations, is telling children different things. And I get there's an age, you know, piece to it, but you shouldn't make it so much so that you tells so much to one and hardly anything to another, because that actually siblings need to be able to lean upon one another, and they're going through this together. Even if they're going through it at different ages and different understandings and comprehension, they're still going through it together. And you're actually kind of creating a cross coalition if you overshare with one and undershare with another, which can actually cause a lot of damage to the family dynamic later on down the line. So I would try and keep it consistent, especially in terms of the first conversation, but also in the terms of the meeting. So, if you have a 5-year-old, then it's a park date or whatever it is that you can go to that 13-year-old can come along to, and then, you leave it at that. And then you kind of build up from there. And so they will probably have more questions. Doesn't mean you need to, only answer what's appropriate, but, it's probably more in the terms of the questions that they're going to ask as opposed to the information they need to be told.
Okay. And what about if your new partner also has children? How do you do the children to children meeting?
So I would start with the new partner first. I think trying to introduce children and new partner is just too much.
Yeah.
So I would stay with the same baby steps, and then when it's appropriate and you feel that the kids are ready and you're in the space, then again you start the same thing again, but in a neutral setting with the children. And it's a small, as I said again, like it's an hour or whatever it is. You don't, that's it. We're all going on a 2-week family vacation. Like it's got to be babysit, because also you've got to think that the children are going to be at different stages in terms of accepting, and they may have different feelings about it. The introduction of a new partner can spell, oh gosh, mum and dad really aren't going to get back together, and it's because of this person, not because actually they were never going to get back together anyway. The marriage is over, but you don't know what hope they were kind of harbouring. So you don't want those feelings to get pinned on the new partner, and the acceptance of the new partner being dependent on that. And it may be different for each child. So it really has to go at a pace that works for everybody, as much as possible. And then once you kind of do that initial and it's almost like a play date, and you kind of then build up from there, and then you can start to look in terms of blending around kind of new traditions, or if there's going to be living arrangements, or that kind of thing, and starting to bring them together. But relationships take time, and if you're really serious about this person, then you've got time on your hands. You don't need to rush it. So you can do it in the best way, so that they can create a role in your family, because they are going to take on a new role, the same as you and your co-parent have changed roles in each other's lives, and how your dynamic changes. You then need to make space and room for this other person to come in and slot in, and not for anyone to feel that they're being undermined, or they're being pushed out, or that there's any kind of competition or competitiveness, or having to make a choice. And that only happens if there's time for people to adjust to the fact that there is a space, and this person is going to gradually fill that space, as opposed to being sort of shoved square peg in a round hole.
And so what if you are that person then? So you've started a new relationship, they have children, you maybe have your own children from a previous relationship as well. How, what should they be taking into account when they're introduced to their new partner's children, and how can they best approach that?
Yeah, so again, I would take it as though you would be meeting another parent's children, a friend's children. You are friendly, but you're not trying to parent them. Sometimes as well, particularly with teenagers, if you show too much about them, you can kind of get their back up. Let them tell you about them, not all the assumptions and things that your partners, filled you in. Oh, I hear you love football and da 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 da. Like, show an interest, but don't be almost too keen, because it can kind of come across a bit overbearing and a bit like, oh, so you talked about something, me, like you don't know me at all. Do you know what I mean? You can start to kind of ruffle a few feathers. Let relationships need to kind of evolve. So allow that to happen. Don't be kind of too in the face. Equally, don't be completely standoffish. Really, don't be this, but don't be that. There is kind of just a friendliness and an openness. But remember that this is a huge transition for them. So, be mindful of that. But equally, you're adjusting to this too. So there's a level of respect that, if children are being really disrespectful to a new partner, then I think it's up to the parent to try and address that, and you need to kind of work with that with your new partner. I remember when I was younger, so I'm the youngest of four, and I was only 5 when I met my stepmom, and she's the most laid back, loveliest person you'll ever meet. But when I was going through my teens, I had a real attitude and looks to kill, and all the stroppiness to go with it. And I remember there was one time I really pushed her buttons, and it takes a lot to push my stepmom's buttons, but I really pushed her buttons, and she shouted at me, and she went to my dad and was like, "I'm really sorry, I've just shouted at Nichole." And she thought he was going to be cross with her for sort of shouting at me, because he was always sort of left to do the parenting, and she sort of was in support of him, but took the backseat. And he came up and gave me the biggest telling off of my life, I think, because it was like, you don't disrespect her. And she was so taken back that he'd supported her in that moment and not me, because she'd always sort of assumed that, she shouldn't shout and she shouldn't get involved. But I'd been really disrespectful to her. I've been a horrible, stroppy teenager, and I'll tell you, I never spoke to her badly again. And actually that just showed, the support and the love and the respect that my dad had for my stepmom, and has absolutely set the scene. My dad passed away 15 years ago, and every single one of us still has a very close relationship with our stepmom. And that's because of, the other thing that you see is mums and dads not really knowing how to deal with the disrespectful behaviour sometimes that come from children that aren't our own, and we don't feel like we can discipline them. And it's having that support of your partner, and having those conversations about how best to handle that. And if you've got supportive co-parents, then having that consistency and being able to all support one another, because you're all trying to do your best by the kids and by the family that you've now created. You are all a family. I think is so powerful. But if you don't put the groundwork in, then you undermine all of that. And luckily my dad did do the groundwork in terms of introducing his new partner, and my mum never felt undermined. And in fact, my mum has just come back from a long weekend at my stepmum's this weekend. Oh, wow. So, and I wasn't there. None of us were there. Just my mum and my stepmum. So you can get to that stage, but it's absolutely about how you kind of you set it up and make room for everybody, and support one another in doing that, because it's not easy to be the new partner any more than it's to be the co-parent or the person trying to introduce it. It's a bit of a minefield.
It strikes me that that making space is important, and probably part of that is making sure everyone sort of has a role. I mean, not as formal as that, but I guess the kids will thrive if they know, okay, these are my boundaries with step-parent, and it's a very different relationship than it is with my mum. It's not a second mum. It's not going to blur those lines where the children don't know what to expect. And that's probably helpful for the adults involved, isn't it? Is to kind of know where those boundaries are, know where the distance should be and where the closeness should be, and how it all slots together.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing, new partners coming in don't want to replace, mums and dads. And saying mums and dads want to, move on with their own lives and know that their children are well cared for and happy when they're not with them and they're with their other parent and their new partner. Ultimately, that's what you want. You want to all move on and thrive. And not everybody's in that right mindset, and I understand that. And that's why I'm saying, showing some respect to your co-parent. Also, discussing this stuff before you're ever in that situation. So putting it into a parenting plan and agreeing how you want to do this, and going back to that at a time when it's not even on the cards. When you can think, less emotionally, is really key. But then, finding space for everybody, because as you say, blending families can be brilliant, because you can end up with more siblings and aunts and uncles and grandparents, and you can come together for events and things, which I'm really fortunate that my family are able to do. But that only happens if people feel there's room and roles for one another. And also, it's about kind of going, and this is the strength of the co-parenting relationship, with saying, I don't agree with that, or that upset the kids, or this happened. If I went home and said to my mum, my stepmom, shouted at me, and she said, well, what did your dad do? And And I said, well, Dad shouts at me too. My mum would probably agree with him, to be honest. But, if she then could pick up the phone to my dad and go, what happened? And, they can actually have that conversation of how to handle it. Or, actually Nicole's quite upset about it. Perhaps we need to have a follow-up conversation. Whatever it is, that's the strength of me able to co-parent. Or actually, I don't agree with that. Or I didn't like the fact that this happened. It's not letting all the little resentments build up, which is actually just good practice in every relationship, whether you're...
Yeah, you need to be able to kind of disagree agreeably, don't you?
Exactly, and be able to raise issues and agree how that's going to be handled, or, and get those things. It's all the little things that you don't say that build up that, can really undermine relationships. So I think, realising that you're not trying to replace anyone, but there's room for everybody, and that's how you all move on. And you're at the stage of blending, which, not everybody's going to be at the same stage to just go at a pace that works for your family.
What if the relationship isn't working so well? I've sometimes referred families to sort of family therapy type things. Perhaps you could explain those a little bit and give your views. Is that something that can be useful with blended families, and how that might to establish those boundaries and work for the individuals?
Yeah, I think when you're in it, it's quite difficult to, to separate the emotion and to be very rational and see the other perspectives. And that's where, coaching and therapy can help in terms of just understanding and putting yourself in each other's shoes and bringing those conversations together, facilitating some of those conversations in a way that's productive. But yeah, it is about... every healthy relationship has boundaries, and it's knowing what those boundaries are and realizing that they're going to be tested, and therefore what are you going to do when they're tested? Because if you're setting a new boundary, then that's a change in behaviour that you're expecting, and it's not that you're expecting the other person's behaviour to change. It's you're making a change in terms of how you then handle that. That's the point of the boundary, and you're enforcing that. So it's understanding what your boundaries are, and then introducing them into your relationships, and expect them to be tested because it's something new, but it's then how you handle it, and then patterns of behavior. And sometimes it helps to have a third party to help you establish those, and because you want to go, am I being unreasonable here? And to be honest, your friends and family, love them dearly, but they're on your side and they will often see your perspective. There are a few who will try and do it, but sometimes they're not objective, and they're coming with their own experience as well, so they might be leading with, well, they've done that's because that might my ex did this, and or my parents, or whatever it is, and they're going to come with that. So sometimes it's helpful to have that more objective, professional kind of third party to kind of see the wood through the trees a little bit and help you get to that place. But there are some people have amazing support networks that can see both sides, and that's what you're really trying to do. You're trying to see your perspective, their perspective, and then the third perspective. If I was watching this like a play, what would I be thinking then? And then how do we have healthy boundaries to support that, and where we're all trying to get to, because often we're trying to get to the same place, but we're coming at it from two different angles that are just butting heads.
I think there's lots of really useful tips there, and I think that obviously, as you'll know, Nichole, from previous experience, what we like to do on this podcast is finish firstly with a bit of positivity. So let's kind of go back to thinking about what things can work well, and that's a great story about your mum and your stepmom being close. That's like admirable, and I'm sure a point that most people would want to get to if they could. But also we like to finish with a few little takeaways for people. So if someone is in the position, whether they're thinking about it or they've just done it or they're working through the process of the blended family setup, what are your top tips for people to introduce their children to a new partner?
Yeah, so tell your co-parents first. Try and tell them together if possible, or at least get their support and tell them when it's going to happen. When it comes to introducing your children, tell them about it before you make an introduction. Give them time for things to settle in. Same for your co-parent as well. And then do it in really kind of bite-sized pieces. So don't do a whole weekend, do a park date, do a coffee, do whatever, and gradually move up to that. And if there's children, do the same. Start with a new partner, and then the same process for introducing children. If you haven't got it in a co-parenting plan already, speak to your co-parent and put it into the co-parenting plan before this even occurs, so you both know what the best case scenario is of how you would both want to be treated in that situation, how you can best both support the children in that situation. And from the partner's perspective, allow the children to tell you about themselves and build that relationship organically. Don't go all guns blazing, telling them everything that you heard about them and kind of being too much. Take it at a slow pace and let them get to know you, and you get to know them organically as you would any other relationship.
Perfect. Thank you. So that's it for this episode of Stow Talks. Thanks for listening. You can find out more about the work Nichole does supporting separated parents at www.nicholefarrow.com. Nichole and her husband are currently working on their own podcast, Parenting and Modern Marriages, which will focus on how to have successful family relationships and will be out soon. If you would like more information on our podcast, head over to stowtalks.co.uk and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.